What if Russia used nukes in Ukraine? Kiev lies in ruins, a smoldering crater where a city once stood. The blast wave has barely subsided, but the shockwaves are already rippling outward. NATO's emergency meetings, global markets in freefall, and a collective breath held as the world waits to see if this is the spark that sets off a chain reaction. One Russian missile has unleashed a maelstrom of chaos, and the unthinkable has become the new reality. What happens next will rewrite the rules of modern warfare and test the very fabric of civilization. To understand what happened, we have to see what happened before. In 2022, tensions were running high between Russia and Ukraine, with Russian President Vladimir Putin making a series of aggressive moves. In February, Russian forces invaded Ukraine, sparking a large-scale conflict. As the fighting intensified, Putin made a shocking statement, warning that Russia would use nuclear weapons if interfered with. The international community was on edge. NATO leaders strongly condemned Putin's threat, and many countries began to take steps to prepare for the worst. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg assured that the alliance was prepared for any eventuality and was closely monitoring the situation. Meanwhile, the United States, the United Kingdom, and other Western countries began to increase their military presence in Eastern Europe, sending troops and equipment to NATO's eastern flank. They also stepped up their support for Ukraine, providing billions of dollars in aid and training to the Ukrainian military. NATO also took steps to improve its nuclear deterrent. The alliance increased the presence of U.S. nuclear-capable aircraft in Eastern Europe and participated in a series of military exercises to demonstrate its readiness. NATO leaders also made clear that any use of nuclear weapons by Russia would have severe consequences. In response to Russia's aggression, the international community imposed severe economic sanctions on Russia, crippling its economy and isolating it from the global community. The conflict in Ukraine is ongoing, but NATO's collective defense and determination have ensured that the conflict remains contained for now. Now let's ask the big what-ifs. What if Russia had followed through on Putin's threat? What if NATO had not increased its military presence in Eastern Europe in time? Could economic sanctions have been enough to deter Russia from using nuclear weapons? What if Putin's nuclear threat had been a bluff, but Russia's military had acted on their own? Would the international community have been able to respond quickly enough to prevent a nuclear strike? Let's explore them one by one. Number 1, what if Russia had followed through on Putin's threat? Nuclear warheads rained down on Ukraine, incinerating cities and igniting a firestorm of global chaos. NATO retaliated with a full-scale military response, and the skies above Eastern Europe filled with the roar of fighter jets and the thunder of artillery. World markets plummeted as trade ground to a halt, and the United Nations was reduced to an emergency gathering of ambassadors scrambling for a ceasefire. Panic-stricken civilians fled cities and stockpiled food, while others waited in despair for the inevitable nuclear fallout to spread. Citizens of the United States and Europe huddled around radios, bracing for the unthinkable. All-out nuclear war, as the unthinkable had finally become a grim reality. Number 2, what if NATO had not increased its military presence in Eastern Europe in time? Russia's nuclear strike in Ukraine ignited a catastrophic chain reaction, as NATO's delayed response allowed the situation to spiral out of control. Moscow's grip on Eastern Europe tightened, its nuclear umbrella shielding separatist movements from Baltic states to Belarus. Western capitals trembled, their leaders paralyzed by the specter of mutually assured destruction. The global economy imploded, trade embargoes and fuel shortages crippling cities and industry. Mass migration and societal unrest swept the world, as governments struggled to respond to the new reality, one where nuclear war was no longer unthinkable. Fear and chaos reigned supreme as the world careened towards a new era of instability and unpredictability. Number 3, could economic sanctions have been enough to deter Russia from using nuclear weapons? The economies of the Western world are in shambles, but somehow, amidst the ruin, a fragile sense of normalcy has emerged. And the answer to what could have been is seared into the global psyche. Economic sanctions, it's clear, would never have been enough to deter a desperate regime. For in the end, it was the threat of utter devastation that Russia feared, not the loss of rubles. And so the world is left to grapple with the consequences of a new nuclear reality, where the old rules no longer apply, and the threat of mutually assured destruction is the only currency that matters. Number 4, what if Putin's nuclear threat had been a bluff, but Russia's military had acted on their own? Russia's rogue generals have detonated a nuclear warhead in Ukraine, defying Putin's empty threats and sparking a global catastrophe. NATO scrambles to respond as the West is plunged into chaos, with civilians fleeing cities and governments imploding under the weight of their own ineptitude. Economies in free fall as trade grinds to a halt and the world teeters on the brink of collapse. The very notion of international order reduced to smoldering rubble as diplomats scramble to contain the fallout and prevent a wider war, with the Russian people horrified by the actions of their own military, left to wonder if they'll ever be able to escape the global pariah status that now seems inevitable. Number 5, would the international community have been able to respond quickly enough to prevent a nuclear strike? The world is still reeling from the initial nuclear blast that shattered the relative calm of the Eastern European border, and in the blink of an eye, the unthinkable became reality. As global leaders scrambled for a unified response that never came, the once strong alliances and diplomatic channels rendered useless as Russia defied all rationality, with emergency meetings now dictated solely by the clock ticking down to the next doomsday warning. The impact on the world. Looking at the world now, it's hard to shake the feeling that we dodged a catastrophic bullet. But in this alternate timeline, the unthinkable happened. A Russian nuclear strike on Ukraine unleashed a global chain reaction that has left deep scars. Politically, the world has become a more treacherous place. Alliances have been tested, and the rules of international diplomacy have been rewritten. The idea of a nuclear weapon being used as a viable military option has become a harsh reality. The fear of mutually assured destruction is no longer a distant memory, but a daily concern. Socially, the fabric of global society has been torn apart. The panic and chaos that followed the nuclear strike have given way to a sense of unease and mistrust. Borders have been closed, economies have collapsed, and the world has become a more isolated and fragmented place. But beneath all this chaos, there's a deeper question. What does it say about us as a species? That we're capable of such destruction, and yet we're still driven by the same instincts and desires that have always defined us. The pursuit of power, the need for security, the fear of the unknown. And yet, in the midst of all this devastation, there's a glimmer of hope. The international community has come together to try and rebuild, to try and create a new world order that's more just and more peaceful. But the question remains. Will it be enough? The thought that haunts me is this. If one missile could change the course of history, what else are we capable of? The answer, I'm afraid, is both terrifying and liberating. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.